the training we're giving girls now doesn't work. It's a bad fantasy. You know, the idea that you just follow the rules all the time and you will be rewarded. It's not how it works.
No.
It's not how it works. You follow the rules all the time. You're just the one who's always taking minutes at the meetings, which means people assume you're taking minutes at the meetings, which means you get treated like a secretary, not an executive. It is this constant thing. And Japan, for whatever reason, has this tradition of female characters that are kind of hilariously obnoxious. And I guess because people expect it from anime, it's allowed. But the minute you try to integrate a character like that into anything Western, it's, oh, she's annoying. And that's it. You're dead. You're dead. That's it. Like, yeah. I mean, they said that about, the funny thing is that they said that about Ahsoka when she was first introduced in Clone Wars.
I mean, she was also 16 when she was first introduced.
I thought she was like 14, but she was a kid. You know,
yes,
now
she was
nowadays,
young.
Could you imagine that? Nowadays, why is a grown-ass man, you know, mentoring a teenager?
Okay.
You couldn't do that today.
Okay, we're going to come back to internet drama really quick. Yep. So, you know, the whole thing recently with Miranda Sings, Colleen Ballinger getting exposed?
Yeah.
So one of the stories that came out in this whole thing was that her ex-husband had given his number to an, at the time, teenage fan. And the quote-unquote fan tried to spin it as this guy was trying to groom him and sexualize him and everything. It turned out this guy was a complete liar.
Really?
And he had completely warped the narrative. He'd stolen another victim's stories and tried to make it worse. And he was actually in group chats with minors being sexual, yada, yada. But then I saw an interview with the ex-husband, and oh my God, I feel so bad for this guy. And he talked about how he's from Georgia, from the South, and grew up Christian. And so he talked about how growing up in the church as a teenager, there were older guys who would mentor him.
Yep.
And they were like a big brother. And obviously there were boundaries, like you didn't take advantage of having access to these guys, but if you needed help, they were there when you needed them. And so that's why he gave this kid his number, was because
that's what I would assume, like, unless there's actual evidence that
and there is none. There's no indication from any receipts that there was anything sexual about this or anything inappropriate. He was trying to help a kid who he saw as not having anyone else. And now years later, after he tried to help, it was twisted into, this guy tried to groom me, this just so this one kid could get some internet clout.
Right.
And that was the thing. Even in the interview, I was watching the documentary and was like, so you realize giving him your number was inappropriate? And I'm like,
why?
But why have we gotten to that point? That's inappropriate, that a young adult saw a younger person who was struggling and wanted to help.
But that's exactly my point. You could never do Anakin and Ahsoka today.
Yeah.
At the time, it was kindly uncle figure.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I always got big brother from Anakin and Ahsoka.
I never knew what to take from it because of how he ends up. And he's such a horrible turd in the movies. It's funny because I slowly he was never my favorite character on Clone Wars, but I warmed to him And
And,
of course I feel terrible for Hayden Christensen, and I'm so glad he's gotten a victory lap.
and I mean, part of that was there just wasn't time for Hayden to show Anakin's downfall in the
Well,
movies.
not the way they wrote it.
No, so it's Anakin had to come in as a little twerp who's going through his goth phase, and who blames him, really, when you look at how he's been treated by the Order and, taken away from his mom and forced to call someone master.
Yeah.
Even Watto didn't make him do that.
Yeah, I mean, the first 3 films had 6 hours to tell a story that took place over a handful of years.
I think it was like 12 years.
Yeah,
Because there's a 10-year jump between Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones.
Well, but the first 3 films were like a fairly small amount of time.
The original
4,
trilogy.
5,
Yeah, I
and
think
6. Yeah.
5-6 years, I think.
Yeah. This is where I was going with it. The prequels have this massive leap. They try to tell too much story.
Mm-hmm.
And the sequels have the same problem where they try to tell too much story. And that's why I'm so bummed that Ahsoka is not about Ahsoka. Because I'm like, all right, female Jedi Master. We haven't seen this before in live action.
Mm-hmm.
This is interesting. How does she do it? Well, we're not going to know because it's not about Ahsoka. And it's so funny that you get the silence or the pushback that people can't just go, as much as I like the show, you're right.
Mm-hmm.
People have to feel the knee jerk to defend it. And it's like, why? Because they see stuff. I mean, I watched it happen with some of the previous Marvel things,
Mm-hmm.
where people were really defensive of the shows when they first came out. And as more time went on, I started seeing memes about the abuse that Loki suffers and the fact that Wanda's actually the bad guy. But
there are people who are still denying that.
It's so scary.
Yeah.
Like, no joke. Another one, because Wanda, she's not so much a commander queen, but she is a woman with a lot of power. And they even centered her victimhood. And at some point, and this is going to sound really callous, but it's true, and it's really not as bad as it sounds. You have to recognize the world just doesn't give a fuck.
Yeah.
The world sees you as you are now. And there are some people who you can trust enough to talk about it. But most people are taking you where you are now. They don't know what happened to you back in the day. They don't know that. They don't care. And good people won't reject you for it.
Mm-hmm.
The people who, they go and they unload all this trauma right away. You're not forming an adult relationship that's healthy. Mm-hmm. You're forming a trauma bond. And this is, again, why I'm like, oh God, Loki season 2 has started. Because what that should be is the two of them recognizing they're not in love. It's a trauma bond. They are enmeshed. They are, they are a couple of Sims that started as the same, but ran different simulations. Hey, Susu, they shouldn't be whatever they are, because they don't actually really have a gender, kind of, maybe. I don't know. It's also messed up. But they should recognize they have the same kind of damage and they are really bad for each other. I just don't have the faith in Marvel being that mature. Right?
No.
They could do that. I don't think they will because of the Ke Huy Quan is in it. And I know I'm going to like him, so at least there will be moments of levity within all the pain. But I really don't think they have the guts or the awareness to actually talk about they want a window dress trauma. They don't want to talk about it. And I mean, one of the things I really like about Japanese games is when you get one of these female rulers, like Princess Zelda, for instance. I'm doing a whole series on this, so I won't repeat myself too much. But you dive into those games and, you know, dismissing that character as a damsel in distress is missing all the shit she's seen.
It's so reductive, and it again, it overlooks the concept of soft power.
I mean, she doesn't even have soft power. She's like, we have to outsmart a much more powerful enemy. And the number of times Zelda apologizes for her past failures when they finally win and gives Link his life back because he's basically been knighted into her service in some way or another. And, you know, the whole idea of the damsel in distress conventionally is she's blameless. So why would she be apologizing? It's because, you know, in one game, she set apart the plan too late, so Link lost 7 years of his life. That was Ocarina of Time. In another, she actually surrenders to Zant. In Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, she is such a quiet badass. And, you know, people don't seem to understand that when someone is in charge, they can't be running around in a field with a sword. They've got to be back there calling the shots.
That's extremely irresponsible, to put yourself in danger like that, because you have people who depend on you. And like, I mean, Zelda doesn't seem to have an heir to take over after her, but even when you have an heir, transitions of power kind of suck.
Especially historically in Japan. That shit, especially the Hojo period where the Triforce is taken from.
Yeah.
Shit went down.
Oh, yeah.
Because of that. But I mean, it's funny because there's sort of a dark element to the Dragon Age games where in the first game, you can have this romance with this adorkable Arthurian type prince named Alistair. He's voiced by Steve Valentine. His tagline is "Swooping is bad." You find out somewhere through the game, he's actually a virgin. And I'm hooked at that point. I'm like, all right, this is amazing. But he's the illegitimate son of the king and therefore the heir to the throne because the monsters wiped out the legitimate son because he was a moron.
Yeah.
And there is actually a version of the game where they force Alistair to marry the daughter of the guy who was responsible for the plot to kill his half-brother. And it, like, we don't treat forced marriage. There's another part where you can talk Alistair into sleeping with Morgan, who's this sort of like Morgan Le Fay type character, to conceive a child to trap the soul of the archdemon in. Like, the ending of that game is 7 ways of fucked up.
Lovely.
And I mean, you can do it yourself if you're a male character, but if you don't want to die sacrificing yourself, you gotta convince this guy, this virgin guy, to have coerced sex for the first time. It's like, the fuck? When you think about it, it's so fucking dark. You know? And we don't treat it the same way when it's a guy. And the shitty thing about Dragon Age Origins, there is no happy ending for any of the endings, any of the romances, for any of the characters. They all have to go their separate ways. And it's like, why? Why would you do that? If you marry Alistair, and convince him to sleep with the witch, you end up miserable. You meet him as a different character in Dragon Age 2, and he's referring to the ball and chain and complaining about his wife.
Like, yikes.
Like, what bitter person wrote this? Like, people
I hate the ball and chain metaphor.
Oh, I do too.
It makes me so mad. Like, if you think of your partner that way, get a divorce.
And to be clear, I don't like it when women do it either. I cannot stand those nights where people drink mojitos and complain about their significant others. They give me a rash. I can't do it. I hate it.
No, instead of making everyone around you miserable, get a divorce and do your own thing.
Yeah.
You'll probably still be miserable, and you'll realize it wasn't the other person at fault, most likely.
Yeah. And I mean, okay, marriage is hard.
Yes.
It goes through rough times. There are parts that, and that's why not only the maturity, but the social supports that give you a sense of healthy expectation going into a relationship matters so much. And it's funny that we were talking about female leadership, and we ended up talking about so much about romances and relationships. And because I do think the two things are linked, right?
Yeah.
In order to be an effective female leader, and I say this because this is something I struggle with, you do just basically have to charm people. And there are problems where, if you're one of those people, I am not, that everybody just kind of falls in love with you, it becomes a problem later on. Which is why I kind of, it was sort of well, this is the only thing I got, where I right off the bat go, I'm an asshole. I am difficult. I am kind of scary. Know that going in. And like you said, I care about people. It's not in a traditionally feminine way.
No.
But and this is one of my theories of leadership, but one of my big things about caring about people is I will not let one person I care about pick on another person I care about. And if the person doing the picking on can't accept that, they're not worth my caring.
Yeah.
Like, no, if you're going to be on the team, we do things a certain way. And I don't know how anybody else functions. Nothing else makes sense to me. I've seen organizations where everybody's, it's the whole Trump Tower thing of all the backstabbing and, The Apprentice and all that stuff. I don't think that's good for business.
It's really not.
I think that people function best when they know what's expected of them, and they know that if they do mess up, it won't be the end of the world. They'll get told, there'll be a conversation, their perspective matters, but some things it's like, look, there were so many times in television where sometimes I did have to yell at somebody because they were putting themselves in a dangerous situation, or they were going to break a $60,000 piece of equipment. So it was like, fucking stop, like, just stop. And, there were, well, you shouldn't have raised your voice. It's like, would you rather they break, a $60,000 camera, like HD camera? Okay, well, I'm pretty sure that if I hadn't yelled at them and they'd broken the camera, I would have been hauled in here anyway, and you would have been just yelling at me about the other option.
And it would have been worse.
Well, then the camera would have been broken. A person's feelings can heal. Those things get destroyed beyond repair.
Yeah.
Sometimes. But you can get hit with a jib. A light can fall on you. There are situations where it is dangerous, especially when you're doing stunts, or when you're doing things involving nudity. People had to be, I had to tell off a cameraman who was focusing on the girls with his camera and then pretending to pull his fingernails out in front of the lens. And I was like, what the fuck is he doing? Oh, he's just joking around. And at that point, I actually didn't yell. I was actually dead silent. And the whole room was silent. And the director was like, I said the guy's name, cut it out. But the fact that I had to tell them that, and the anger comes not just from your own mistreatment, but the fact that people think that, oh, well, now you're in crew, now you're one of the guys. But no, you're not. It wasn't my job to be their friend. Mm-hmm. It was my job to get the show done. And I got branded a bitch. And so it was constant attempts at insubordination. And it got tougher and tougher and tougher to get things done because, they'd go over my head or they'd lie to somebody. They'd be really good at pitting people against each other. That's the reality of television. It's a shitty business. There's a reason that increasingly there's a no assholes policy. And, as much as I don't dig the Star Wars content, I do like what I hear about how they choose who to hire sometimes, because they suss somebody out as a person before they offer them a job.
Yeah.
And I like that. I like hearing about that. But it is, when we do talk about female leadership, and this is where people like, so what? So what? It doesn't reflect the real world. So what? It's like, okay. We started off saying, yeah, Hyborian doesn't reflect the real world. But wouldn't it be great if we could have some stuff that did and actually gave us a roadmap of how to succeed? Instead of just doing a revenge porn plot where you then break the fourth wall and just retcon it. Like, that's fucked.
Yeah, there's...
can we get a Black Widow movie where she doesn't save the day with self-harm?
God, that
was another thing I was treated as crazy about at the time. You're making too big a deal about it. It's like, she literally saves everything by breaking her own nose.
In a way that doesn't even make sense, because there's no guarantee that it will work.
It doesn't stop your sense of smell. That was so stupid. It was just continuing the Whedon thing of when she seems most vulnerable, she's secretly in control, which that he made Natasha rape fantasy from the beginning of her introduction in the Avengers when she's tied to that chair.
And look, that scene where she was tied to the chair, that makes more sense than breaking her own nose in hopes that it will break a certain nerve.
I'm sorry, when the Hulk rampaged, she was not in control.
No.
She wasn't. That's a terrible, terrible message to send, because it's sort of, well, why can't you be a superhero? Why can't you prevent? Like, that's more shaming women who fail to overcome oppression, than Domina. It just, I was watching this going, what are they doing? What are they saying? Like, no, you're not. And part of the problem with leadership is knowing when to show vulnerability. And that was sort of where I embraced my trickster gods, which is why I'm so protective, because it's like, I will, I have some health conditions. Song, you've been there when I've been, look, I'm having a flare up. I need this to stop.
Yeah.
And part of that is I wait to see who throws it back in my face. And somebody always does. And it's like, yep. Not always who I predict it's going to be. But that's somebody telling on themselves.
Yeah.
And so that is, I actually got that from Sherlock Holmes stories, believe it or not. where he's having a manic depressive episode and he's actually weak from like he's like passing out, and so he pretends to be overcome with emotions, like he can't do it, he needs to go lie down, and he goes and steals something out of somebody's pocket. But he was willing to seem weaker than he was to get the job done.
Mm-hmm.
And some people would be, that's manipulative. It's like, no, it's not. It's being strong enough to be vulnerable. And that's something we don't do real well with female characters, that we don't balance that strength and vulnerability terribly well.
Yeah.
It's either the hot mess or the, all I can call it is the Bo-Katan. Like everything's just handed to her. She's literally handed the Darksaber. She, oh, you're gonna be the leader because you saw a magical dinosaur. And a whole bunch of people die for her. And nobody goes, why are we doing this? Why is she in charge?
Mm-hmm.
And it was all really because God told you, which totally, I thought, stomped all over the message of season 2 when Din took off his mask for Grogu.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, well, he has to do all this stuff, but she's had her helmet off for God knows how long. She gets let back into the Mandalorians and then immediately gets told by the armorer, no, take it off. You walk between two worlds. Well, why couldn't he walk between two worlds?
Yeah. And it's,
he was there with the dinosaur too,
No, but he somehow passed out after being underwater for half a second. Like,
yeah.
My mom was rewatching that season recently, and I watched him just drop in the water, and I'm like, I'm sorry. He couldn't swim, like that. I realized that whole rescue is so forced. It doesn't make sense.
It's
like
so
I realized,
weird.
I'm like, okay, armor heavy, I get that, but she was wearing her armor too. How did he black out? So completely, just, oh, I'm submerged, there's a switch in my head that I'm just gonna black out now. What the fuck was that?
Maybe there was some toxin from that critter or something like that, but like you said, the whole thing just felt forced.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense.
It was the same problem that they did with Rey. Instead of doing the Ahsoka thing where they start her as the sidekick and let you get used to her, you force her on the audience, like her or else. I really think Rey could have been the exact same character if she wasn't the lead. People would have been much more accepting.
Even if she just hadn't started as the lead and they had started with giving us Luke, Leia, Han, and Chewie, and just let us adapt to the new characters and then had a passing of the torch.
Yeah, exactly. But they forced, Poe Dameron was supposed to die in the first movie. He kind of won everybody over quickly.
Oh, yeah.
But it's Oscar Isaacs. He's just really good. But even Finn, Finn had nothing to do.
They wasted Finn.
What a fucking disappointment. But it's, I see the point, I don't buy the whole Mary Sue. And now we're going to get into the whole fight of Rey and Mary Sue. You're not going to convince me. I'm just expressing my starting point. Because now I'm going to agree with you, dear listener, that I do think it was the forced, pardon the pun, presentation. That if they had not been front and center right off the bat, it would have been a very different thing. And I do think that was part of the merchandising, that Disney never tells anybody who the characters are. So nobody knew that Rey was the main character.
Which, let people think that Finn might become the next Jedi.
Yeah, Finn, they just didn't know what to do with that whole grudge match with Phasma went nowhere, which was really disappointing.
I do wonder if they weren't prepared for the China backlash, which
It's
I
very
don't see.
possible.
Yeah. And I've said before, there was one Chinese review that was like, if it had to be a black man, why couldn't it be an attractive one like Will Smith?
Oh, I mean, Disney was trying to play nice with China.
Mm-hmm.
At that point, they've
A
given
lot
up.
of studios were, but like China's most recent change of the laws, it's like I think Hollywood has realized that they can't.
Oh, they can't play nice. I think they found that out the hard way with Mulan.
Mm-hmm.
Because yeah, whoops, it was right in the shadow of a Uyghur camp. Uh-oh.
And there was also the issue that there's a they them pronouns. So there's a person on YouTube, sorry, I don't know what else to say, who they are Chinese.
Uh-huh.
And they did a video called Every Inaccuracy in Mulan 2020.
Oh, I think you
Or
linked me to that video.
I think so.
Yeah.
And they went through and just broke down historical, contextual,
Yeah.
cultural, all the issues in
Yeah.
the live action movie. And later they did a everything right about the animated movie. And they were like, okay, so culturally it's better. It's funnier, but it's also more respectful.
Yeah.
So it works. And it's like when you had a Chinese person coming in and just
Yeah.
ripping into it with this, and this. It's like it was one thing in the 98 version when it's like that wasn't such a big deal with cultural accuracy.
Right. Right.
And
Yeah.
it's like
Eddie Murphy is a talking little dragon. That didn't happen. We know that. Yeah.
The Christian directors have gone on record saying they made the ancestors comic relief so that people wouldn't be interested in Chinese religion.
Oh, wow.
Which, like, I only know that because they said it in a Focus on the Family interview.
Wow.
So it was something that was said to a Christian audience. But it's like, even so, the way they did it worked. And I don't think a lot of people were complaining about that too much. If they knew about that quote, they might be. But it's like,
but that just also shows how rapidly things have changed, right?
yes.
How rapidly things have opened up.
Yes.
And I do think we have to be a little forgiving on the one hand, but on the other, the fact that we seem to be in agreement that some of this older stuff actually depicts female leadership better.
Oh, yeah.
And it's tied, I think, to not trying to be quote unquote relevant for somebody. There's something really vulnerable about fantasy in that when it's done properly, it is the author showing you their soul. You know, because it's fantasy. Like, this is what's beautiful for me. This is what I think is good. This is what I think is evil. It's a real bearing of the center of a person.
More than any other genre, except maybe speculative fiction, sci-fi, I think it reveals what's in someone's head.
Yeah. And gut, right? I mean, yes, putting, naked ladies on covers was a move to get stories sold, but the character of those women, that was all him. And the fact that they were so different, and what is centered, and we've over intellectualized the idea of centering, which is why I try to talk about, no, I want Black women in fantasy because they're beautiful. It's not to make a point. It's not to be an ally. It's not to be any of that shit. Like, it's time. Let's please, Lizzo with that giant butt bow. in Star Wars. Like it is time that there's no reason not to.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact there has got to be some artificial barrier to that sort of inclusion because it's notable.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Monica Rambeau's the only one who hasn't been a series lead in the Marvels. There's
True.
just something, there's still some tension. And I honestly think that part of it is just people are afraid of getting called names. And there is still a real barrier for Black women that's unique. Latino women as well, but that seems to be giving a bit
Mm-hmm.
more, I think, because sometimes people don't know they're Latina.
Yeah.
But we're gonna fuck it up the first few times, which is why we have to try. Which is why it's so sad that the Woman King got blacklisted.
And I think part of it does come down to there is the fear of misrepresenting someone.
But these were Black people making the movie. It was a majority Black female cast. How could you tell them they're misrepresenting characters that look like them?
Well, I mean, not even just in that movie. It's, coming back to my own experiences with writing certain characters.
Oh, no, I get what you're saying.
Yeah.
Which is why I found the response to that movie interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Because the response wouldn't allow it to be about anything but slavery. And what I find so interesting is that, the Roman Empire had slavery. The Greeks had slavery. Pretty much every culture had slavery at some point. And yes, the Dahomey sold people as slaves. That is a major part of the movie.
And even not just on that movie and the subject of slavery, every culture has had some form of colonization. Every culture has had some form of going in and slaughtering the people who were there before and taking over someone else's land. It's like this idea of go back where you came from. Well, we can't even trace where people came from.
Not with any reliability.
Yeah, there is so much migration and patterns of conquest and all these things that to try and focus on just the most recent one and say, oh, we need to change this. Well, honey, if we look back at your own culture, we're going to find the same thing there.
The problem with the term decolonization, and I understand the argument. I agree with large parts of it that we should understand what was lost, is that it's not really possible to go back. There are certain wrongs that should be righted, and I definitely think that people should understand that people from certain backgrounds are not just lazy. They were traumatized. There's intergenerational trauma there from being forcibly migrated, either within the country the way the indigenous people were, or in the transatlantic slave trade. That wasn't just individual trauma, that was destruction of culture. And what I really liked about The Woman King is that it showed a bunch of women making the best of a really shitty situation. And it was a superhero movie in all but name. It showed the unique impact that slavery, the transatlantic slave trade, and literally these tribes enslaving their enemies and selling them. Like, it just shows how messed up it was, but how it uniquely affected women.
And that's one of the interesting things as I was watching the controversy with that movie is people, I hate to say it, but mostly white people were like, well, why are they glorifying these slave traders? And it's like, well, then having not seen the movie, I can't speak to whether it glorifies it or not. But, there are still people who think the slave trade was only perpetuated by white people, and they don't know that there were quite a few African tribes who were selling their enemies, and they were the ones
Yeah.
making it possible in many ways. There's
The
this.
only thing I'd really say kind of does is that the male love interest
Mhm.
is half white, but that becomes a plot point at
Yeah,
some point. It wasn't just, oh, whiter is more attractive.
and it's like, what, at least it was talking about the fact it happened.
Yeah.
And that's why I really didn't and obviously that most of this was before the movie came out, but seeing people who were like throwing a fit about it before it came out, I'm like, why? I didn't get it. Just, and especially afterwards, and like you're saying, okay, they do talk about it, so it's like, yeah, that's something more people need to be aware of, that this was not just white people going in and hunting parties, it was the
Yeah.
actual tribes selling
They're
their
yeah.
enemies.
Yeah.
So
Or
it's
their
like,
own people sometimes.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's like, okay, so that's the best way to make this knowledge more prevalent and to let more people know, hey, this is how it actually works.
And the idea that that means the people who are trafficked deserve it. No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. It and what there was a subtle thing because they complained that, oh, they have um something happens at the ending that wasn't historically accurate. But the entire time, this king has been proven to be a bullshit artist that makes promises he doesn't keep.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought it was interesting that they the movie does a lot of things, and the thing I didn't like was you could argue that Crazy Rich Asians milked so many stereotypes.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard people say a lot of stereotypes about older Asian ladies.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it, Chinese people were like, no, we want to show your money's good. If you make movies about us, we will pay to see them.
Mm-hmm.
And the saying the right thing effect with the Woman King meant Black women have to be perfect to be seen as valid. And that's not right. You know,
Mm-hmm.
like, go see it, judge for yourself. It's not going to be a documentary. They never are.
No,
Every
and
every single one of those biopics has major changes, including Oppenheimer. So see it,
shock
judge it.
of shocks, Emperor Commodus was not killed by a gladiator.
Yeah, yeah,
He
yeah,
he quite possibly was the son of one,
yeah.
but
But it's like, see the movie, judge it for yourself. Don't expect just because it's Black women. They Black creators should not have to be paragons of their race.
no.
They should be able to say things and do things and challenge and ask questions like anybody else. And this is the thing that drives me crazy about, progressive politics is everybody wants everybody else to do the right thing. But when it comes to actually rewarding flawed best efforts, no, because everybody just wants to point fingers.
Yeah.
And so, I thought Wakanda Forever was great, but it's still a legacy thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's not something where Black women were centered from the beginning. And I do think that we need We do need to bust those beauty myths. We do need to show that everyone, every set of features can be glamorized by media. We can't just, the fact that if you type beautiful woman into an AI image generator, you get, a vaguely anime looking character. That's a real sign.
Which, I mean, I've been following art. I was on DeviantArt back in the early 2000s.
Yeah.
So it's like I've been a part of that long enough. That does not surprise me at all.
It doesn't, but at the same time, the typical anime look is a caricature of white faces.
Mm-hmm.
The giant eyes, the teeny tiny nose, the pointy chin. Like, Asian people don't look that way.
No, and anime characters look like cats, ultimately.
They look like anime.
Yeah.
But the fact that an appearance that doesn't exist in nature is now considered the beauty standard, that's really fucked up.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that people didn't go, oh, when that happened, they get defensive and they start just emotionally reacting instead of going, all right, this is just talking. This is just asking questions. This is not attacking me. This is not saying I'm bad. This is just a different opinion. How about I give it a chance? When we start doing, as far as I'm concerned, that's like voting to me.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't vote, you can't complain. And
Yeah.
I know people are going to argue that that's just a shorthand with the intention of being reductive. If you can't listen to a dissenting opinion, please hold your own hot takes.
Yeah.
Like, it's got to be a give and take. Because, I mean, just an example of, landing the plane on female leadership. Look at the number of men on the internet that, and all media, who are known for saying outrageous things. Just basically being shitlords.
Yeah.
Right? They far outnumber the occasional woman like Candace Owens, who does
And even then, the women have to walk a line.
Oh yeah.
And like, God, I hate Candace Owens.
I mean, let's face it, that's what she's there to do.
Yeah. She's a token because she said the right thing.
Yeah.
In regards to race.
Yeah.
And now she's doing completely unproblematic interviews with Andrew Tate where she's feeding him his answer.
Right.
To
and
prove his innocence.
Meanwhile, Trump can say, oh no, abortion bans are a bad idea. This is a loser. And he's still winning. He's still winning in the polls. There's cults of personality form around men because it's the whole, he's a strong leader.
I mean, we didn't even get to talk about Joan of Arc.
Yeah, we sort of ran out of time. I think that's a different, we can talk about her sort of with mystics at some point. Because that's, well, woman is sacrifice, I guess she'd factor in, because I mean, that's not a happy ending, that story.
No, but I mean, France did win the war, and whether they could have done that without her is,
well, she had some pretty powerful noblemen backing her up. And I mean, I see Joan of Arc as the Greta Thunberg of her day. She was a figurehead, right?
Yeah.
And Greta's hardcore. But
yeah,
Greta is not the one organizing those protests.
No.
And I give that girl a ton of credit because, oh my God, grown men, some of the things they say to her, and she has no fucks to give. You know, it just, her and the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas kids, they got pushed too far. And I think part of the reason that everything is so fucked up right now is because people have lost the belief that they can work within the system to make change.
Mm-hmm.
So we went through that burn it all down period that resulted in Trump.
Yeah.
And that didn't work either. Because of course it wouldn't, but I understand the sentiment.
That just made things worse.
Yeah, but it will, because you don't elect a billionaire to change the system. Billionaires benefit from the current system.
Yeah.
But, people expect these massive magical dinosaur moments, right? Oh, we're going to see a sign and it's going to be very clear. And then we're just going to march in lockstep. And it doesn't matter how many guys with kids die. She is our leader. We follow her. We never doubt. That is not life. And so the minute somebody like Kamala Harris says something people don't like, she's Satan.
Mm-hmm.
And until we break that wheel, we're going to have a problem with women leaders, unless they're, Thatcher. Sarah Palin could do it. Thatcher can do it.
Mm-hmm.
Marjorie Taylor Greene, for fuck's sake. Like, Lauren Boebert should not be in Congress. She shouldn't.
No.
She's not an adult. But, the conservatives, if they can get elected within reason, again, you have to say the right things. They will fuck you up if you hit certain landmines.
Mm-hmm.
But they will allow people to fuck around to an extent, in a way that the minute a progressive steps out of line in one way, they fall immediately.
Yeah, it's that purity testing.
Yeah, and no leader's going to survive that kind of purity test, because leadership is not a pure profession.
No.
You end up having to choose between some profoundly bad options and living with the consequences. And until you've done it or had like a loved one have to do it, you don't really see how gut-wrenching and impossible it is.
Yeah.
So it, as much as people scream about a woke agenda, I'm not really seeing it in terms of the depictions of female leadership. I'm seeing a lot of enforcing of status quo outside of anime.
I'm also seeing a lot of, I hesitate to say toxic fantasy, because like I talked about that with Belit, and we know I love Belit in
I
the
think
Conan.
We should talk about toxic fantasy at some point too. That's a good topic.
I think so.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of times where it seems like they want the female victim who is oppressed, and they want to have her overcoming it, but
not really.
She's just ends up being a terrible person.
Well, what they want is the I'm fine now.
Yeah.
Without doing the work.
That's not how that works.
We'll let Bucky, just wallow for so long, which is more accurate, but really fucking depressing.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's like they want to flip a switch and all of a sudden everything's okay. And that is not fucking life. You got to live with your scars.
Yeah.
So, all right. We've been going for 3.5 hours.
Oh, God.
We shall call it. Yeah, I know time just flies, but that's the thing about two women talking. We start one way, we wander a whole bunch of places. We come back, we wander again, because that is the way two women talk. So thank you for listening to Sonda Björksen, Erickson. I've been doing the which of the Pickwick triplets did it, and so the K's are in my mouth. Yeah. So watch Only Murders in the Building. I am Leanna Kersner Tomboys. Check out Song's book if you want little vignettes of powerful women doing pretty things. Cowboys Chronicles Volume 1. And Song, until next time, I'll give you the last word.
All right. I think I've said just about all I need to.
All right.
Thank you for listening.